2025 picks. You guys clicked on this video because you want to know how they look right now. You probably have a bunch of firsts in your dynasty leagues and you're wondering, hey, I'm going to have the 105, I'm going to have the 107 in the class. What players am I looking at? How are they performing? How is the class materializing? What does the wide receiver position look like? The running back position look like? The quarterback position? Is there a tight end worth speaking of in this class? We're going to definitely detail that. We're going to basically go through like our top 12 through top, 15-ish kind of players here and talk about how they're performing to this point in the college football season, maybe some early concerns, kind of what we saw from them in summer scouting. So this is going to be a ton of fun. I know you guys have been fiending an update on this class.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we kind of gushed hard about this class being underrated coming into the year. And boy, it's delivered. If you took that advice going in, because everybody was talking about, the strength of 2023, the strength of 2024, those were the hyped classes that nobody was really talking about just how strong 2025 can materialize into being. And yeah, if you watch the running back wide receiver rankings breakdowns that we did over on Flock Fantasy throughout the offseason, a lot of the stuff that we were saying, if this happens, has ended up happening so far.
Yeah, and the position we didn't talk about was quarterback, and we have gotten a couple good developments at that position as well. Like currently right now, Mel Kiper, his top 20 overall big board, has 5 quarterbacks in the top 20. Now, I don't know if that's going to materialize. I don't know if that's going to keep up. But if we do get 3, 4, maybe 5 first-round quarterbacks, this class is going to be a lot better than people thought. Because not only that, some of the quarterbacks that we might be getting are going to be fantasy darlings, given that they run the football. So let's start with everybody's draft crush. Everybody loves Ashton Jeanty, Boise State running back. And he was our RB1 coming into the season. He was I don't know if he was yours, my 101 coming into the season. I can't remember.
Consensus top 3.
Consensus top 3 guy for us coming into the season.
Yeah.
I have never seen a more absurd season from a running back in my life than what Ashton Jeanty is doing at Boise State. They have played 5 games, 5 football games. Boise State.
He's played 4. He's played 4 because he sat out 2 halves.
So he sat out 2 full halves of 5 football games here. He has 1,031 rushing yards, 16 rushing touchdowns. His PFF grade is 99.8 in 5 games. For reference, Blake Corum and Bijan Robinson are shared holders of the PFF record of 96.2. So he is on pace to break the PFF rushing record in terms of overall grade. He is having a Heisman caliber season at this point in time. I think you'd have to consider him and, Travis Hunter, maybe some of the quarterbacks, at least to be the Heisman favorites. The one thing that he's not totally delivering on as of right now is he only has 11 targets on the season, 6 receptions for 19 yards. But I mean, he had 44 catches for 578 and 5 touchdowns last year. So we already know he can do that.
It's clear as day to me. The reason why Ashton Jeanty isn't getting receiving usage is that he is the entire offense on the ground. We saw last year, like you said, he had a near 91 PFF grade as a receiver last year. I don't think he just up and forgot how to play receiver out of the backfield. The only issue is that he is so good on the ground that there's been no need to split him out wide. Why would you get an inferior player throwing the football when Ashton Jeanty is giving you 10.9 yards per carry right now? There is currently 5 players in college football averaging over 5 yards after contact per attempt. Jeanty's at almost 8. He's at 7.95. The next closest is at 5.6. The same discrepancy between Ashton Jeanty and number 2 Caleb Johnson, who's at 5.60, is the same discrepancy between Caleb Johnson and the guy who's listed at number 50, Kajon Owens, at 3.30.
It's insane, man. We could gush for hours about how good this guy's season has been.
He looks like Barry Sanders. If you guys want, not even being hyperbolic. In terms of the prospect, in terms of the stature, in terms of the tackle breaking ability, the receiving ability, the breakaway run ability, like it looks like we're getting the second coming of Barry Sanders. And again, people are going to be like, well, like you guys called, Saquon Barkley generational, Bijan Robinson generational. I think you could very well make the case that Ashton Jeanty is a better prospect than both those guys. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be concerns. And as I ran them through the prospect model. If you guys are site subscribers, of course, you can actually go check that out. I did this offseason, I did 2025 prospects in the prospect model as sophomores. I ran them all through wide receivers and running backs. And one of the surprising developments of that was that Ashton Jeanty stacked up with Christian McCaffrey as a sophomore, that Christian McCaffrey was a junior. So he was very highly thought of for us coming into the season. This guy is a 90+ rushing grade every season of his college football career, including as a true freshman. He has a 91 PFF receiving grade as a sophomore, as a receiver, as we talked about already. The only knock on this guy will be athleticism, if people are concerned about it, which I'm not, frankly, but people are somewhat concerned about it for some reason. And the other knock that they might have is level of competition. That would be pretty much it. But you know what? He literally
against
ran
Oregon.
192 yards and 3 touchdowns against Oregon. So I don't really care. And also Washington State, which is a Power 5 team, he ran for 259 and 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, the level of competition, I understand if you wanted to say it last year. When you do it against Oregon and you are the very clear best player on the field, I don't give a fucking damn if you play in the Mountain West. I'm going to be completely honest. If this guy was on Alabama, we'd be talking about him as a top 5 overall potential NFL draft pick in a day and age where running backs don't go in the top 5, man. Like, genuinely speaking, if he played for Alabama or Georgia, which, by the way, if you guys remember in the offseason, he got tons of NIL offers to go to Power 5 teams, but he declined to stay with Boise State. Honestly, too, that also shows the level of person he is. The fact that he had so many offers to go to bigger overall teams. And he said, you know what? I am going to stay at Boise State. I'm going to be the engine of this offense. They are, I believe, the number 16 or number 17 team in the country because of Ashton Jeanty. Not normally do you see a running back with that level of impact on the football field. And again, we'll talk about the narratives in terms of potentially the running game really coming back into the fray for the NFL, because we're seeing with all these too high looks that defenses are playing, a lot more explosives instead of what we've seen a few years ago, a lot more explosives in the passing game. We're seeing a lot more teams with your Saquon Barkleys, with your explosive running backs, developing more explosives in the run game, knowing they aren't coming in the passing game. I'm telling you right now, with the trend that the NFL is currently on, I feel very confident in saying he's going to be at minimum a top 15 NFL draft pick and potentially a top 10 NFL draft pick. Should a team like, let's just say it's the Chargers, maybe they lose a couple of games and they're at the 9th overall pick. You don't think fucking Jim Harbaugh is going to be seeing this guy and licking his chops?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So Jeanty, in our opinion, is the clear 101, both in one quarterback and super flex league.
Absolutely.
The thing I would ask you right now is, obviously, this will depend what happens with the quarterbacks. Who is 102 gun to your head right now? Is it Tet McMillan? Is it Luther Burden? Is it are we projecting one of these quarterbacks to get high draft capital? Again, we're going to talk about, if you guys have early to mid projected first, obviously do your damnedest to make sure that first becomes 101, because Ashton Jeanty will be Dynasty RB1 the second he enters the NFL as a top 15 NFL draft pick. But what are we going to do with the rest of these, 102, 103, 104 in this class?
So coming into the year, we actually, like I mentioned earlier, did our summer scouting wide receivers, and I had it graded with Burden at 1 and McMillan at 2. But I think at this point in the year, it's undeniable that Tet McMillan has just flat out played better football. So I'm going to lean McMillan. Again, I think you could very well make the argument of Burden, or if we had the certainty that Travis Hunter would be playing wide receiver at the NFL level, him being in this consideration. But Tet McMillan, I mean, we're seeing kind of now the breakout of Drake London, obviously in that Thursday night game, the level of target commanding, the level of overall chain-to-chain movement that he brings to the table as a number 1 wide receiver. I think Tet McMillan has Drake London level upside in the sense that he does bring the size to the table, but he's so much more than just a big wide receiver. Yes, is he 6'4", 200 plus pounds? Absolutely. But what I had listed in my notes coming into the year for Tet McMillan, fluid mover despite being a taller wide receiver, navigates through traffic well. Obviously, we know what he's going to do as a ball winner. I mean, he's 6'5", 210 pounds, for crying out loud. You guys can connect the dots that if the ball's up in the air, the 6'5" guy is going to come down with it. But like I said, he's dynamic. He can move across the formation. He can go in motion. Like, I feel like he's not just your set it on the outside, boundary wide receiver and just watch him do everything on the boundary like a George Pickens would in the NFL. He's got so much more versatility to his game than that, in my opinion. We've seen him be a yak threat this year. Last year, 91.4 PFF receiving grade versus man, 3.94 yards per route run against man. We saw what he was able to do on the table last year against man, but I think this year we have seen him take another development step to be a full, complete wide receiver and be a zone beater as well. So with Tet McMillan, again, I have less question marks about him at this current point than I do with Luther Burden. But like I said, I think Luther Burden is the type of talent where if you wanted to rank him at 102, I think that's perfectly fine as well.
Yeah. There's a lot that you could say about both of these guys. Burden is not having as good of a season remotely as he did last year. Luther Burden was right up there with Malik Neighbors as the best receiver in the country. Like you could have made the argument, like I know Marvin won the Biletnikoff. You could have made the argument that Burden actually would have been second to Neighbors in the Biletnikoff. If I was actually giving out that award, it should have been Neighbors last year. But yeah, that's how good Burden was as a sophomore. He has not quite had the same level of season. I don't know if it's injury. I like Mizzou's quarterback play, from what I understand, has not been super great. And Burden has been more of the, screen merchant or whatever that we were worried about. And that was the issue we had for him coming in to the season, right? We wanted to see this guy develop more of a route tree. And I absolutely think he's capable of doing that still, but you have to knock him for what's taken place so far. And Tet McMillan has had the better season. Tet McMillan, of course, especially the first 2 or 3 weeks of college football, was just lighting it on fire.
He was insane. I remember the opening night game. The guy had a 93.4 receiving grade and 300 receiving yards. Has it been all, sunshine and rainbows? No, like he said, had a couple off games, 50 yards here, 11 yards there. But for the most part, knowing that he has a type of ability to completely alpha a football game like he showed in week 1, I think that ability is still there. And I mean, he's still gotten insane usage in the 5 weeks overall in the season, 59 targets in 5 games. And 4 of those games being over 11 targets, 11 plus.
Yeah, no, he's been super awesome so far this year. There's a lot of receivers that have, I would say, disappointed relative to expectations, who Evan Stewart and, some of these other guys that you could point to. I think Tez Johnson's been pretty solid this year, but I actually expected a bigger season from him, just production wise, because he's an older prospect. There's guys that could have had bigger seasons for sure. And Tet McMillan is one of the guys that we expected to be great coming into the season. He has been great. You mentioned Travis Hunter. I think it is absolutely outlandish how good of a season he's having at both wide receiver and cornerback, obviously, because if you guys are not familiar with Travis Hunter, he plays both sides of the ball. He is 9th in the NCAA right now in receiving, despite playing corner as well. And he has, what does he have? He has 54 targets on the season and 6 touchdowns with an 85.3 PFF receiving grade. The most mental part of Travis Hunter is, as a corner, what do we know corners to be? Bad hands, right?
Yes.
65% contested catch rate over his career. Travis Hunter, a 71.4% this season. So this dude, the ball skills, the movement ability, the athleticism this guy showcases, like you talked about, do we know what position he's going to play at the next level? Is he going to play corner most of the time and then maybe some receiver? I anticipate it's too challenging for an NFL player to play both sides of the ball. It's too physically demanding from both a watching film and studying your opponent perspective, and also just on your body.
The issue I may have, though, the issue I may have with Hunter in the projection, it's easier to be a full-time corner and a part-time receiver than it is a full-time receiver and a part-time corner.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
That's the issue I have. Again, if we knew tomorrow that he would say, as I go into the NFL, my focus is playing the wide receiver position, you can even make the case, maybe not over Jeanty, but you can even make the case over Tet McMillan. He is a freak talent. He was the number 1 player in his class for a reason. The guy is oozing with talent. It's just, I don't think we've ever seen a case like this. I know, actually, we were talking about it before we recorded. The last time we saw a case like this was Kyler Murray, when we didn't even know if he'd play football or baseball.
Yeah, no, the way you should treat Travis Hunter is, if he's in the class and he's playing receiver, great. Otherwise, I mean, the class is still good without him. But like you just said, with Kyler Murray, his rookie season, in 2019, we were looking at the 2019 rookie draft cycle, and it was, a bunch of guys. It was mainly receivers and running backs because, of course, Daniel Jones was the second quarterback taken. And we were looking at, some of the other guys. What was it, Josh Jacobs' class?
Yeah, I think Dwayne Haskins was in that class at the time. Rest in peace. But
was it N'Keal Harry and Metcalf and AJ Brown?
Daniel Jones, that class.
Yeah, so we were looking at that class, and it wasn't the greatest rookie class, to be honest. But then when Kyler Murray played football and he was the first overall pick in the draft, we're like, great, we have a super flex quarterback that we can take super high in the draft. And Travis Hunter plays wide receiver, so it's a little bit different. But the ability that this dude has, if he plays wide receiver at the next level, he has a chance to be one of the best players in the rookie draft cycle, period. And I took him in our Devy league in the 5th round because everybody just assumed he would play corner at the next level. And I would say at the very least, he's gotten more valuable since I've drafted him because there's a better chance he plays wide receiver.
Well, I mean, in the 5th round, especially, again, I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't take the stab because I took a couple running backs that may not see day 2 capital over him. But with Travis Hunter, dude, looking back at it, even if we thought he was going to play corner, the minute he lasted into the 5th round, it's why wouldn't you swing for the home run, knowing that
absolutely
it's a complete dartboard anyways of all the guys
we're best ball league too, so I never have to choose when to start Travis Hunter.
Yeah. So I mean, point remains, you got an insane value there. If Travis Hunter, like I said, plays receiver, the guy has 4 games over 100 receiving yards, and his worst game of the year was 9 receptions for 89 receiving yards. If you stack his pure receiving profile up there with the rest of the class, like I said, you could, even with him playing corner fucking full time in Colorado, you can make the case he's the best wide receiver.
Well, yeah, and I ran him through the prospect model last offseason or in the offseason, and obviously he wasn't going to stack up super well analytically because he doesn't play full-time receiver. And he was still the fourth best receiver in the class by the model, which again doesn't account for the fact that he plays cornerback full-time as one of the best corner prospects in the country. You can make the argument that if we had to mock draft the NFL draft today, he'd be the first overall pick. Because he can play both sides of the ball, and he's super valuable, and coaches will absolutely love that about him. And he's obviously really competitive, and he's like, there's nothing wrong with the dude. If he plays wide receiver, if he came out and said, I'm not playing corner at the NFL level, I'm playing wide receiver, he is absolutely in the discussion for 102, 103, 104 in this class.
He's got the upside, regardless of position he plays. Again, obviously, we're hoping he plays receiver. We're praying he plays receiver. But the reason why we're taking the dart throw on Travis Hunter is he has the upside to be a top 10 player in the NFL, regardless of position. And if that position ends up being at wide receiver, you're looking at a guy with legitimate high-end wide receiver one ceiling.
Yeah, it would be rare if this happened, but I actually think, because you know how you said it'd be a lot less likely he plays part-time corner and full-time receiver?
Yeah.
If he did, maybe he's just like the nickel or something. That would maybe make some sense. But yeah, I have a feeling
for Hail Marys.
I have a feeling that what's going to happen in the NFL is that Travis Hunter is going to play corner full time, and he's going to be on the field 40 to 50% of the routes for his team as a receiver, which is,
already bonkers.
He's going to have value for sure, especially in dynasty best ball leagues, like I talked about already. But it would be, I think he'd be a managed league headache and a best ball headache, like a regular underdog fantasy best ball headache to like, where the hell do we value this guy? He's clearly talented enough to break fantasy football. We just have no idea if he's going to play offense more than, 200 snaps a season.
For sure. And that's why at this point, with the knowledge that we have, I would still lean with Luther Burden. So he's going to be the 104 here. With Luther Burden, I understand this has not been the year either of us anticipated. However, I mean, we have seen flashes in certain games of him showing that last year level of play. It hasn't been on a consistent basis with what's been a very up and down Mizzou team overall. Like, if you guys have been watching Mizzou football last year, I'm pretty sure last year they finished as like the number 6 or the number 7 team in the country.
They were a top 10 team, I think, by the end of the year.
Yeah, and they're coming off now like a big time blowout to Texas A&M, I believe. So like Mizzou as a whole just hasn't simply been the same football team that they were last year, and Luther Burden hasn't played up to that level. However, what we were saying coming into the year, the notes I literally have written down on him: absorbs contact and bounces off defenders with ease after the catch. Array of ball carrier moves combined with a compact build to make him an open space nightmare. Offers incredible versatility as a true wide receiver as well as a weapon out of the backfield. Even if he doesn't live up to the upside comp I had here, which would have ended up being Jamar Chase, who did I just describe in the NFL that maybe isn't the best at doing overall wide receiver things at this point? Like, I think Luther Burden's got the talent to be that level, but he isn't quite as refined at this point. Who has that to their game? But because there's such a dynamic open field threat and get touches out of the backfield, it hasn't really mattered. That's Deebo Samuel. If you're telling me you're getting a Deebo Samuel level player who is more than likely going to get top 10 level draft capital, even with the bad year, I think he's got to be at the minimum an early to mid first round pick. And I think he's got the upside to go back to the 103, the 102 in this class.
Yeah. I mean, in 2.65 yards per route run and 78.4 PFF receiving grade, he had his best game of the year as far as receiving grade is concerned this past week against Texas A&M, despite them losing. So hopefully he can turn things around. I had very lofty expectations for him as well. Coming into the year. My comp for him was Malik Neighbors, because Malik Neighbors also was a slot receiver at LSU. And Luther Burden, one of the knocks on him, as we talked about coming into the year, is that he's not a full route tree guy. He's more of a short to intermediate target. If you dropped Luther Burden into the Rashee Rice role, for example, for Kansas City, he would go nuclear. But if you dropped him into, I don't know, whatever offense doesn't know how to use their players, like the Jets across from Garrett Wilson or something, he probably wouldn't have that great of a season. So he is definitely going to be more scheme dependent, more landing spot dependent prospect. But dude, 1209, 9 touchdowns, 91.0 receiving grade, 3.29 yards per route run as a 19-year-old true sophomore last year, made him an analytics darling. And people are going to love him from that perspective. And he will test very, very well too.
What was crazy about him is, even though I just described, a Mickey Mouse utilization player, which at times last year, that's kind of how he was used, get him the ball in open space.
Watch the tape and you could tell he's not just a Mickey Mouse.
Exactly. And that's the point that I wanted to point out. And on top of that, when you look at his grades as well, he wasn't just demolishing zone. Like a Deebo Samuel type, he's not very good against man, but he demolishes zone. Luther Burden had 3.37 yards per route run against man, which was 5th amongst the wide receivers I watched in the summer cycle, and was 3.73 against yards per route run against zone, which was 2nd. So it's not like he's a one-trick pony either way. Like, he can separate and play big boy wide receiver routes. It's just, given the context of the offense, he hasn't really been tasked with doing so, like a Tet McMillan, for example.
Yeah. And I think a theme of this video, once we get through all the players, will be like, there's a lot of really good players in this, but there's like upside that the class gets even better than we're maybe even projecting it.
Yes.
And let's start with the quarterback one discussion right now, because we could talk about some of the RB2 candidates here, and I think that they'll definitely have a place in the 103 to 107 range. But I think if we get first round quarterback prospects, this is about the range that we need to start talking about them, especially if those quarterback prospects are named Jalen Milroe or Cam Ward, just because those two guys have dual threat skill sets who are going to play in fantasy football leagues, because as we've seen now from the rookie quarterback who won the Heisman last year, Jaden Daniels is breaking fantasy football right now. He's a top 5 quarterback for me in redraft rest of season. Keep Trade Cut has him as the 101 in Dynasty Superflex drafts right now. I would not take him that high, but he is like, if you drafted Jaden Daniels, you have a massive return on investment from where you spent the pick.
And we'll start with Jalen Milroe real quick. We'll talk about Cam Ward as a passer, because I think he's been better as a passer comparatively to Milroe. But what I can't keep coming back to is the guy who just put up nearly 500 yards from scrimmage and 4 total touchdowns against fucking Georgia. He has a very real chance of going as the first overall pick in the NFL draft. Was I lower on Jalen Milroe watching what he did against Michigan in that bowl game, not really looking good, eating sacks, causing turnovers? Like, he looked like a quarterback last year that had his highs and had his lows. And although they lost to Vanderbilt, Alabama, because they were the number 1 team, lost to Vanderbilt this week, he hasn't had a game where I'm reminded of the guy that was inconsistent last year. Every game, even in that loss against Vanderbilt, the guy's
12.9 yards per attempt.
The guy's played good football. And on top of that, he has 9 rushing touchdowns in 5 games this year. So it's not hard to picture a path that if this guy goes in the top 5 of the NFL draft, why can't he be Anthony Richardson? Why can't he be Jaden Daniels? He's got the same archetype and the same level of rise in his final draft eligible year to be able to have that level of conversation. It's going to sound crazy right now. People are like, well, Milroe last year was awful and it's only 5 games in. How can you say that? Jaden Daniels, before he was the Heisman, wasn't the Heisman. Like, it happens in the year that they're eligible once everything clicks. And for a guy with the natural talent that Milroe has, it looks like it's clicking.
Yeah, well, and you'd probably assume this is a physical specimen. He's like listed 6'2", 225. He looks like a running back. He doesn't even look like a quarterback. He looks like, physically, he actually looks a lot like Lamar Jackson. Like, if you
Why
look at
can't he be Jalen Hurts?
Exactly. So when you look at his archetype, you would probably assume what about him as a passer? He's inaccurate, right? You'd probably assume that. Dude, he has an 82.7 adjusted completion percentage this year, and he averages 11.6 yards per attempt as a passer. This is more Jaden Daniels than it is Anthony Richardson as far as like what this, and also prospect. Too, Jaden Daniels having a monster season in the NFL is great for Jalen Milroe's prospects to go high in the NFL draft.
Well, dude, and it's funny too, because I mean, we saw, for example, who's the quarterback that played in this offense before Jalen Milroe?
Bryce Young?
No. Who's the new head coach for Alabama? Kalen DeBoer. Where did he coach last year? Washington. Who was their quarterback? Michael Penix. So if you're worried about, Jalen Milroe, this is a flash. Michael Penix was a Heisman candidate last year, and Jalen Milroe, from a talent standpoint, I would argue is levels ahead.
Well, yeah, and Michael Penix was a top 8 pick in the NFL draft as well, and we didn't actually think that was going to be the case. So, again, I said at the beginning of this, like, did I expect any quarterbacks to even go in the first round this year? Like, a lot of, the people I trust, the people who are doing good work on quarterbacks said, like, there might not be a first-round quarterback, or maybe there's 1, or maybe there's 2 at absolute most.
Every
they're
mock
probably
I'm
projections.
right now.
They're probably projects. Like, Mel Kiper has 5 in his top 20 of his big board, and I didn't think that was going to be the case coming into the year, and we're seeing it materialize. And Milroe, from a fantasy perspective, is absolutely the most interesting one because he plays for a big school. He's probably going to go high in the draft as a result. He's being mocked first overall, top 5 in all these mock drafts. And he has the ability to rush for 800 yards and 10 touchdowns his rookie season in the NFL if he is going to start for the Carolina Panthers or the Las Vegas Raiders, whoever ends up taking the first overall pick quarterback or the top 5 overall pick quarterback. Again, the big caveat for all of these quarterbacks is how high do they get drafted? But Jalen Milroe, especially once the season's over, like let alone he's already having a good season so far, but when the season's over and he's going through the draft cycle and he's showcasing his ability and his talent, his 40 time and his size and his arm and all this stuff, like he's exactly the type of quarterback that NFL teams will risk their job to go and draft.
When this dude runs in the low 4.4s, like he's going to go in the top 5 in the NFL draft. I think it's just going to happen. If he keeps having the year that he has been, he's going to go in the top 5 in the NFL draft. And we could also make the case for Cam Ward. I mean, I don't think he's quite the rusher that Jalen Milroe is, but what he has done, especially even as a passer for Miami, man, has he made a couple, boneheaded mistakes? Sure. But what he is doing is putting that whole fucking offense on his back so far. I mean, Xavier Restrepo has had a breakout year with Cam Ward now. Obviously, Cam Ward himself, he's had a lot of buzz across these last few years. I believe he, at a small school a few years ago, put up insane numbers, not great numbers. I believe it was Washington State in his stop before this. Goes to Miami, and like we knew the talent was there, but we're starting to see it fully unlocked for Cam Ward. And again, we could also even just throw Shedeur Sanders up there too, because I think he's the other guy being talked about in this range. We're seeing these 3 guys as the highest mocked first overall quarterback off the board. Going into the year, everybody's like, oh yeah, it's Beck and it's everybody else. These are the 3 guys when I go to a mock draft, whether it's PFN, PFF, Trevor Sickmo, any of these guys putting out their big profile mock drafts, one of these 3 guys is always the first overall pick, and 2 of these guys always end up going in the top 5.
Well, and that's great news for us in fantasy,
Yes.
right? Would Carson Beck have gone in the top 8 of rookie drafts if he was the first overall pick? No. Yes. But would we much rather have Jalen Milroe be the quarterback that goes high in the draft? Abso-fucking-lutely. If you guys have 2025 first-round picks and you're wondering, has my pick gotten more or less valuable since I acquired it last year or this year or whatever, just by the fact that we have rushing quarterbacks in this class that could go high, it's gotten more valuable, let alone what Jeanty has done with the 101 and, Tet McMillan and Burden and Hunter. And we haven't even talked about the rest of the running back class, which is frankly ridiculously strong. And we'll talk about it here in a second. But yeah, the fact that the positive signal of we have some quarterbacks now is taking place in the 2025 draft cycle is great news for those of you guys that were wondering how valuable these picks were going to be.
We haven't even talked about the guy that, I mean, there's honestly 2 guys with Hampton and with Quinshon Judkins. You can make the case for as being a top 3 running back in each of the last 5 years. That is the level of talent they are at the running back position. Are they getting overshadowed right now because Ashton Jeanty looks like the second coming of fucking Barry Sanders? Yes. But with both those guys, like, dude, Hampton looks like the next Nick Chubb and Quinshon Judkins looks like the next Ezekiel. And I'm not even just saying that because of the Ohio State on his helmet.
Yeah, and like I think you can make the argument too. Like Hampton, obviously, he's a workhorse so far this year for North Carolina. He's like 137 carries in 4 games or 5 games, or sorry, 6 games that they've played so far this year. So I mean, the dude's averaging over like pretty much 20 carries a game, over 20 carries a game. Dude, he also has 16 receptions. He has 19 targets on the year so far, and he had 32 targets, 29 catches for 222. And a high elusiveness rating as a receiver last year. So, I mean, you look at Hampton as a 6'1", 220-pound guy. We talked about him in summer scouting. You comped him to, Nick Chubb or, Jonathan Taylor or whatever. Like, he's built like these dudes. And I said it too. With the 2.8 on his back, he looks like Jonathan Taylor when he's running the football. Yeah. I think he's a lot more raw from like an instinct standpoint than like what JT was or what Nick Chubb was coming out of school. Yeah. But the encouraging thing is with that size, with that athleticism, with the ability that he has, the physicality. There was one play, I don't know if you remember this play. I think it was against Charlotte in week 2 or North Carolina Central or whatever in week 3, where he just like truck stick the guy into the touch, like into the end zone on like a stretch play.
If you guys have not tuned in, like obviously we've watched the film on all these guys going into the year, so we're very familiar with them. But even if you just don't watch the full condensed film of a player, like throw on some Omarion Hampton highlights, throw on some Quinshon Judkins highlights, and then contextualize that we're talking about them at 108 and 109 right now. Like in so many classes, these guys would be viewed as top 4 overall players given the talent level.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like Hampton, again, when you drop a prospect in a lab from a fantasy perspective, what do we look for? We look for size. He's 6'1", 220 pounds. We look for production. He had 1,500 rushing yards and 15 touchdowns his sophomore year. Currently has 764 and 7 touchdowns in his junior season. He's an early declare if he comes out this year. He has athleticism. He's probably going to be a 9.5 RAS type of athlete, and he catches the football. What else could we possibly want from a guy who, like you just said, is not in contention for the 101, not even close for in contention for the 101 right now. You could make the argument that we have him too low. If you're a running back heavy dynasty league or in one quarterback leagues or whatever, he'll probably go 103, 104, 105 in those type of league formats if he gets top 50 NFL draft capital. But the very fact that he is, a depth piece in super flex formats, if we do get first round draft capital from some of the guys that we have listed here, he's a really interesting one for sure.
Like we're looking at two guys that could be valued as top 5 to 8 dynasty running backs as being the 108, 109 in the class.
Yeah. And I mean, like Judkins, his profile is starting to come full circle as well, because I talked about it with Jeanty. He had 90 plus rushing grade all 3 seasons of his career in college. Judkins was the freshman of the year in the SEC, had a 90.7 PFF rushing grade last year, fell from grace a little bit, only had 4.3 yards per carry at Ole Miss. But this year at Ohio State, he's at 7.8 yards per carry. He's 90.3 PFF rushing grade, 3.67 yards after contact per attempt. His elusive rating is the best of his career so far. He's not heavily involved as a receiver at Ohio State because Travion Henderson's a little bit better in that aspect than he is. But his profile is getting to be really, really complete as well. And of course, knowing that he was such a Devy darling is also going to factor in for his tradability, market value, whatever you want to call it, for your 2025 first, because people know who Quinshon Judkins is. They have for years. So the fact that we have this guy potentially is like 105 to 109 in this kind of like mid first range, depending on the quarterback draft capital, is pretty spectacular.
Yeah. The thing with Judkins is he's also the type of guy that the NFL is going to love. Same with Hampton as well, for what it's worth. But like these guys with the size, the speed, the ability to break big runs, despite also being able to do the dirty work between the tackles. Like there are guys that are going to go higher because there's not blemishes in their profile, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and Judkins, of the two of them, is definitely the most like refined from like vision and instincts and patience and stuff like that. He's definitely a little bit more refined than I'd say than when Hampton is. But like Sanders too, we didn't really mention him, but he's a top 5 graded passer in the country right now. Of course, he is. I'm already annoyed by the stuff that's going to go around with Shedeur Sanders because he's got an attitude. He's like, if
you thought Caleb Williams was bad last year, this is
this is going to be bad. Like I already know that this is going to be bad as far as the things that people say about Shedeur Sanders, but like the reality of Shedeur's game is this is an easy stat to just exemplify what type of passer this guy is. 7.1 big time throw percentage so far this year. 0.8 turnover worthy play percentage. He is a protector of the football. He knows how to pass in an NFL offense. He knows how to sit in the pocket, deliver strikes. He's a good, not great athlete. It's weird because his dad is like the fastest player in NFL history or one of them. But he is definitely an interesting quarterback prospect. The controversy around him will 100% be what is above the shoulders.
I will say though, in terms of that aspect this year, just from a football perspective, the biggest knock last year was inviting pressure that he just simply didn't need to. I feel like he's gotten a lot better this year in terms of his pocket presence overall. So that's something that the NFL was probably looking at. And if he can continue playing the way he has been in terms of getting the football out, not holding on to it far too long. Again, is it still somewhat of an issue? Sure. But last year, there was points where like, yeah, was his offensive line bad? Yeah. But he was inviting so much pressure, and he's not doing that as much this year. And in fact, Colorado is such a better team this year than they were last year.
Yeah, his pressure to sack percentage, like when you compare it to some of the top quarterbacks in the country, is 22.2%. Like for reference, Cam Ward's is 12.3%, which is like extremely low. 19.4% for Jalen Milroe. Jackson Dart's is 20.4%. You look at Arch Manning is 27.8, but he's like a first year starter. Drew Alars is lower than Shedeur Sanders as well. So I would say he's still generally inviting a little bit too much pressure. And hopefully that improves throughout the course of the season. But like you said, he's made marginal improvements. And I think coming into the season, most people had him consensus wise as like a top 2 to 3 quarterback in the class behind, Carson Beck or whoever else.
But I think all those guys are pretty set at this point. People know what they got with them. Now we move on to the next tier. And I think there's like a cluster of 6 guys that you can think make the case for filling into the end of the first round, early to mid portion of the second. And I mean, we'll just throw Trey Harris on there first because what he's been able to do so far this year, if you're just looking at the numbers, has been absolutely bonkers. And I mean, this is a guy that we both liked coming into the year. We thought he was a raw player that had to refine some of the parts of his game. We thought that from a pure physicality standpoint, he was there. Some concerns with his separation. However, judging from the numbers he's putting up this year, looks like he's ironing out a lot of that game.
Yeah, I had him as a top 5 receiver coming into the season. And what I really liked about him was that despite being this like strong, sturdy, big athletic guy, he wasn't the most sure-handed dude in the world. And he didn't have like the best, route running fluidity, but you could tell he could put it all together. He was capable of doing it. And he's having a great season. I mean, he's leading college football with 885 receiving yards in 6 games. He has 5 touchdowns. Top receiver in terms of receiving grade. He has 5.67 yards per route run right now, which leads the country. So he has
85% of his routes on the outside, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's not getting any gimmies really. And his like route percentage as far as like outside routes is like up in like the 90% range too, when you factor in his alignment. So Trey Harris is one of these guys that is going to have a little bit of wonky prospect profile because he's not an early declare and things of that nature, but he's having a great season and he definitely is on pace to, be in the like Biletnikoff watch kind of situation right now. And that's going to be valuable to NFL teams, especially he's got size. He's going to test well. Like he's going to be a guy that the NFL likes.
Yeah. And I'm sure this is also going to be a guy that the fantasy community really loves, seeing that each of the last 2 years, extremely efficient. This year in particular, really blowing up in the box score. The question I have is, does the NFL view him as a day 1 pick, or does the NFL view him as more of a, I don't really trust the college offense. Maybe he slips to like the 37th overall pick. That's the only real concern. Again, it is not much for us because 37 versus 28 isn't very consequential, but you could even make the case just off of the overall body of work of the numbers. He should probably be a top 20 pick.
Yeah, no, and you can make the case we have him too low right now as far as the type of season that he's having right now. There's 2 other receivers that we can talk about quickly, Emeka Egbuka and Isaiah Bond. Both guys, I think I had both of them top 6. Yeah, I did. No,
Same.
sorry, I had Isaiah Bond at 9, so I was a little bit lower because I was skeptical of him coming into the Texas offense, but he's had a really nice season so far. Emeka Egbuka's had a really nice season so far. I mean, it seems that Emeka Egbuka just has to constantly compete for targets with generational guys. Jeremiah Smith, of course, the freshman, comes in and he's, I believe, outproducing Emeka Egbuka right now. But
he's outproducing a lot of guys.
He is 433 yards and 5 touchdowns through 5 games of Ohio State's season is very solid, especially when you factor in what Emeka Egbuka did his sophomore year, of course, last year, dealing with a ton of injuries. But I mean, 3.83 yards per route run this year. I also think that this is a guy that the NFL will absolutely love. I'm seeing block and tape of him all over the internet these days where people just love it. Like he reminds me so much of Chris Godwin. It's insane. And I really do think that NFL teams will share that sentiment. And again, one of these guys like Trey Harris that, does he go 20th overall? Maybe. Does he go 40th overall? Maybe. Like, I think he's very clearly a top 50 overall pick in the NFL draft this year.
Yeah, Egbuka, I think it was Ian Hardis that tweeted out, like, he's just going to be this generation's Bobby Trees. And, like, I could totally see him landing on, like, a McVay tree, Shanahan tree system. He's the motion guy. He gets a lot of those little cheat motions, cross the formation, dump off to the flats. Very, very good after the catch. Like, I could see an NFL team, especially from that tree, really grab. Like, would you be at all shocked if Ben Johnson goes to head coach somewhere and he makes him his new Amon St. Brown?
Yeah. What if Ben Johnson takes over as the head coach in Jacksonville or something, and Christian Kirk is maybe a cap casualty, and he might
get traded this season. By the way, I've heard him getting floating around at the trade deadline, which by the way makes sense. You're 1-4 Jags team. Christian Kirk played 53% of the snaps last week. I can see a contending team really, like, if they miss out on like the Cooper, the Adams, going for a Kirk, probably for like a 4th or 5th round pick. And yeah, like you said, like if he was like the 1-for-1 replacement for Kirk, but also playing like the Amon or St. Brown role from the slot rather than the vertical slot role, I think he could be an absolute dynamite fantasy asset.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of upside with him. Isaiah Bond has been a little bit more boomer bust as far as like his production is concerned. He's at 3.08 yards per route run so far this year for Texas. Yeah. Again, I admittedly, like, I'm a Texas fan, but I have admittedly had to pick my battles as far as how much football I watch in my house with, can't watch all the Saturday games in addition to watching football all day Sunday. So I have not been a dedicated or devoted Texas fan this year. If I'm being,
I've watched a good amount of them.
But I think what I've seen from Bond, it's like he's very obviously going to bring the big play element to the offense. He's very obviously one of these like 4-2 potential speed receivers. He came in and replaced Xavier Worthy's role more or less as far as stretching the defense. So he's having a nice season, 364 and 3 touchdowns, but he's a guy that I think NFL teams will like given the speed element that he brings to the table.
Yeah, especially with what we're seeing from Jameson Williams, how he's really unlocked every other part of that Lions offense. Like every offense needs one of these guys, the 5'10" to 6'1", 4.2 wide receiver that isn't just a fast line runner, but could also produce. I mean, we saw, for example, like you said, with the Chiefs, prioritizing that with Worthy, Jameson Williams, now obviously what he's unlocked with the Lions. I think Isaiah Bond is next on that list. And in terms of these 3 guys in this tier right now, I feel the most confident that the NFL will take him in the top 20 versus the other 2.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the draft capital should end up being there. Let's rattle off a couple more names just quickly. Carson Beck, of course, was most people's consensus quarterback 1 coming into the season. Quinn Ewers got off to a nice start to the season for Texas, and then
Singleton,
obviously suffered an injury, and then Arch Manning has kind of taken over. I also wanted to include Ollie Gordon here just because a lot of people had him as a top 3 running back coming into the season. Right now, his PFF rushing grade 71.8. He's averaging 3.6 yards per carry. Not having the type of season you'd want to see. There was also the whole like off the field issue that he had coming into the season. He's going to be a weird evaluation if he doesn't start playing better, because I think I'm a little concerned as an Ollie Gordon, a Devy manager right now. I'm a little concerned.
Yeah, and we'll get through like each and every guy like very, very quickly. But like the fact that we're 15 names deep and like the consensus tight end 1 in the class, Colson Loveland, who's going to be a top 20 pick, isn't in this list. Nick Singleton, who's gotten a ton of buzz, looking like true freshman Nick Singleton. Like, dude, there's so many guys. It's so early in the college season to the point where, Jordan James as well. Jonah Coleman's looked out good at Washington. Point remains, like, there's so many good names performing right now. And that's even with some of the top names underproducing. We could be looking at a case where we already know we want the first round picks, but we're talking about guys that may not even make the top 24 that are second round caliber players.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap this video up really quick because I don't think we want to go too long on these guys. But like you said, some of the issues we had for Jordan James coming into the season was, can this guy carry a big workload? What is he doing right now? He's carrying a big workload. Some of the names that, or some of the things we had concern for Nick Singleton, down to down efficiency, down to down consistency, but keep that big play element. He's making good on those promises right now. Quinn Ewers, he's improved his accuracy, he's improved his decision making, he's improved his pocket presence. Carson Beck is the one guy that I think has probably lost value just because he's not having quite the season he had last year. I mean, he lost Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers. That was probably going to be the case, but even still, some of these other quarterbacks have surpassed him. I'm notoriously a Jackson Dart truther, so I have to talk about him as well because he is currently PFF's highest graded passer in the in NCAA right now. So, I mean, Jackson Dart, I talked about it. I put a tweet out. I was like, who's quarterback 1 in your opinion right now? And I included Jalen Milroe and Cam Ward and Carson Beck and Shedeur Sanders. And I threw Jackson Dart's name in there because I feel like he's at least in the conversation for it.
You probably got responses of, I can picture it right now.
Army guy meme.
The Army guy with the clown in the middle. Yeah, that's the one meme
exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. People were like, you cannot seriously be putting Jackson Dart in here. And I was like, dude, Jackson Dart has 6.5 big time throw percentage this year, 91.8 PFF passing grade, which leads the country. His biggest issue was ball placement, completion percentage, and things of that nature coming into the season. 78.7% is like a top 10 mark in the country right now. I think he's a very solid prospect who could rise as the draft process goes along. My only concern would be, I don't see any big name fantasy or like NFL draft scouts talking about him as like a first round name. So I would worry about his draft capital, but I actually really think he's an interesting prospect.
Jackson Dart, you are a Los Angeles Ram in the second round.
Yeah, I would be down for that. I mean, he's also like from a fantasy perspective, 6'2", 225. He's got a big arm. He's rushed for 208 yards and 3 touchdowns so far this year after rushing for 568 and 8 touchdowns last year. Like he can move a little bit. He's got an interesting profile to him. Again, is he going to be a first-round quarterback? I would say probably not at this point in time, given what I've seen from a lot of NFL draft scouts. But Ole Miss is a good team. Obviously, Trey Harris is having a great season, and he's part of the reason for that, Jackson Dart. So I'm full disclosure, I have a Devy share of Jackson Dart. So I'm a little bit of a bag holder on him, but I feel interested enough to the point that I think he could be a day 2 quarterback.
Yeah, and I mean, like, we don't even have the graphic up, but I mentioned the name Jonah Coleman. He was my RB6 in the preseason, off of the limited usage he had. And now he is a full-fledged bell cow at the University of Washington who just went and upset Michigan. So like the fact that we're not even talking about him yet too, like when I watch it, he looks like Mark Ingram. If you've never watched Jonah Coleman, he looks like Mark Ingram. So it's like, it just shows how many good names are in this class.
Yeah. Again, biggest takeaway from this video is, we came into the season a little higher on the 2025 class, me and you, than most people were. Specifically the flex positions, the running backs and wide receivers. We thought it was a very great top end wide receiver class. Maybe the depth was a little bit of a concern, and that's kind of playing out to some degree. Like some of the guys that we thought could have maybe taken a step forward from a depth perspective, like, Evan Stewart hasn't really happened so far this year. Alec Manor from Stanford has had a okay season, but not a great season. Nick Anderson from Oklahoma hasn't even played so far really this year. Juice Wells, also
Brown.
Juice Wells also of Ole Miss has had an okay season, but not a great season. Again, some of these guys could have had a better performance than we like to see from them, but generally it's stock up on the whole class in general. Like if you have early to mid first round picks in the 2025 class, you should feel very confident that you're getting either a stud top 12 dynasty running back day one, a top 20 dynasty wide receiver or something like that, if you get one of the top guys, or you might be getting some super flex quarterback assets at the top who have a chance really to be, dual threat guys like Jalen Milroe, Cam Ward, and then again, Shedeur, Sanders, Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers. We'll see how these guys fit in.
Well, I mean, this is why we're dropping the video right now. We're going into week 6 of your fantasy leagues, week 6 of your dynasty leagues. Teams are going to start realizing whether they are contending or rebuilding. Once you realize, say you go to 2-4 and you got a house money situation, you realize, hey, you know what? Maybe this is not my best contending window. We're getting this information out to you guys so you know exactly what you're dealing with when you trade your Chris Godwin for a late projected 2025 1 and 2. When you trade your insert veteran player here for rookie draft picks. The point remains, people are going to be looking at the production at this point of the year to try to make their contending pushes. Just know if you are a contender, don't undervalue these picks. And if you're a rebuilder, try to get to as many as you can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think every contender will rationalize that their first round pick is late.
112.
And it doesn't matter what kind of production they're getting because I can't use that pick until next year. And again, most people in our audience don't think that way, but I would imagine if you're new to the channel, if this is the first time you're checking us out, obviously hit the subscribe button. If you're a newer dynasty player or you're a dynasty player that doesn't really value picks, you should in this class. That's the point.
Yeah, absolutely. Special class, honestly. And nobody was talking about it before the year. And I'm glad that me and you were high on it.
Yeah, no, I have a number of dynasty teams with just like absolutely backloaded 2025 picks. And I feel really good about it.
2 for 2 Devi shares of Ashton Jeanty makes me feel some type of way.
Yeah, and I'm still wanting to die after what I did to get off of my 105 in our Devi startup where I could have gotten Jeanty there. But, we'll live and learn. And unfortunately, I'll have to watch your team kind of take over that league with Ashton Jeanty. But again, if you guys enjoyed this video, we kind of just went through like a state of the union of the 2025 class. I wouldn't necessarily call this a mock draft. I wouldn't necessarily call this, specifically ranking them because we also we could argue back and forth semantics of which guy we would rank over which in each tier. For the most part, the only ranking I feel confident in is 101 Ashton Jeanty. And then, tier wise, the rest of these other guys somewhat fit in. But generally speaking, this was if you have an early to mid first projected, what are you looking at? If you have a mid to late first projected, what are you looking at? If you have 1-2 turn picks projected, what are you kind of looking at? And that was kind of the point of this video. So obviously, if you're a rebuilding team, no better time to go tank for Ashton Jeanty than now. Get that production off of your team. If you got Chuba Hubbard and you're holding out for a second round pick because you got to get a second for a guy producing like this, it is more important to get Ashton Jeanty than it is to get a second round pick for Chuba Hubbard. Let me tell you that for free.
Yeah, I mean, Ashton Jeanty is probably worth like 100 Chuba Hubbards.
Yeah, no, exactly. Shout out to Chuba Hubbard for taking some strays in this video. But yeah, if you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe. All of our Dynasty content is over on flockfantasy.com. Use promo code FSE there for 7 days for free, 30% off any of the packages. You can get your Dynasty teams actually reviewed by us. If you sign up annually, you get 1 free voucher for a Dynasty team review. You can use it on Redraft or Dynasty, but since we're talking Dynasty here, maybe you're in a team, you're a team that is in flux right now, and you're wondering, should I be buying 2025 picks? Should I be selling off production? We can give you that advice personalized to your league and kind of specifically to the other teams in your league. If you use our My Teams feature, you can load your league right in there and we can give you advice on that. And our Dynasty rankings are up to date, obviously, too. If you guys are just looking for Dynasty rankings, you guys can get them over there on Flock Fantasy as well. So definitely check out all that stuff if you guys are interested. But with that being said, peace out and we'll talk to you soon.